Hello and welcome to another Pi Crowdcast. I'm Rick Tarosi, co-founder and general manager of Pi, and I'll be your host. Our guest today is Jennifer Johnson, co-founder and CEO of Pi alum Trestle, and also Pi mentor in residence. Today we'll be talking with Jennifer about how her background in health systems and systems thinking really informed the way the product exists today. We'll be talking to her about how she and her co-founder leveraged the gig economy to keep the lights on while things got tough. And finally, we'll be discussing the new feature in the myTrestle browser extension that enables you to focus your dollars on shopping local during this pandemic. So let's get into this Q&A with Jennifer Johnson, co-founder and CEO of Trestle.
Yeah. Well, first, Rick, thanks for doing this, and thanks for having us on and giving us a platform to tell our stories. It's so great.
Yeah, happy to do it.
As you know, a lot of it's just heads down building, so it's nice to come up for air and talk to humans, especially right now. So my background is in public health, actually. So I have a master's in public health, and I spent the first years of my career in health departments preparing for moments like this, actually. So it feels a little bit odd to not be an active part of it. But so with my background in public health, what the focus with that degree really is building systems. How do we create systems so that people can engage in a happy, healthy life? So there's a lot of policy, it's a lot of looking at physical environments. And so as I took that with me, that system type of thinking, and then I started applying that within nonprofits and government agencies and these varying roles, right? So project management and workforce development and health. And what I saw very quickly was that in both of these sectors, these two sectors of our society that are charged with solving all of our social issues as a society, as humanity, they're the ones that are responsible for solving all of our problems. And yet they're not often given the amount of resources that they need. And really where a lot of the resources exist, financial as well as talent, really exist in the for-profit business sector.
Right.
And so what I was constantly seeing was that nonprofits and government agencies were, and especially in my role, were really trying to create this connection between for-profits, trying to get them to the table, really working hard to involve them in a lot of the solving of social environmental issues, poverty, hunger, anything that a nonprofit addresses. And there was just really, as much as business, I think, would love to do great things, there wasn't incentive structures built in to meaningfully invite companies and businesses for profit to the table to meaningfully address and help participate in solving these. So in this role, I'm like, okay, I'm passionate about solving this. For example, workforce development. Our whole job was to create the pathways so that especially people with diverse backgrounds have actual access to the training that they need so that they can get jobs, that they can get really meaningful careers, support their families, support their communities. It's passionate work. And yet a big part of what we needed to do was involve for-profits, especially in that scenario, to the table so that we can play nice together and really build these systems. So long-winded way of saying, I saw from a personal perspective on the solving issues side of this story, how really challenging it is for these various sectors to work together. And I identified from that side of the table that it really, without an incentive structure that meaningfully brings for-profits in, it's now left up to hoping that they are willing to play nice and want to go above and beyond earning profits. And that to me was just not a system that we can build a society on and really meaningfully address some of the things that we needed to address. So in a few years ago, I was at this luncheon on like a business luncheon, I think in Salem. And it was basically trying to be the business community opposing Measure 97, I believe. Do you remember this one?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a
Vaguely.
big tax on
Yeah.
some of the highest earning
Yep.
companies. And I was on the public health side. So I was always hearing, and the purpose was to raise revenue for the state so that we could support education, healthcare, and elder care, I believe were the three things. All very important, right? And I always was on the public health side, which tends to be the more liberal side of thinking. But to round out my understanding, I went to this business luncheon to hear what the business perspective was. And this gentleman who was representing one of the companies, and to this day I can't remember which one, raised his hand and was like, I'll be the first person to get in line and rally businesses around solving some of these social issues. But taxing us is not the way to do it. And that was the first time ever that it crossed my mind that maybe business can actually be involved in helping to solve some of these social issues.
Yep.
Really? How would they do that if they're only for profit, if their only purpose is to drive profit, which has its basis in greed, which was, this was my thinking time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
How can that look? How can we actually give them more of the responsibility? So it was all of this that really prepared me to start thinking about what does the system need to look like in order for-profit businesses to actually more meaningfully participate in more of the social side of what our society is.
Yep. And so with that in mind, that motivates the creation of Trestle, and tell folks more about like the work you're doing there.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I spent some time thinking about it, what would this world look like if 100% of for-profits meaningfully participated in solving social issues? What does that world look like? And ultimately what I came to, there's a lot of work to be done, but the inroad that we really attached ourselves to was from this consumer-driven demand perspective.
Okay.
And in order to
that motivating factor that had been missing before.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about incentive structures, there's one incentive piece that is extremely important to for-profits, and that's customers spending money. So we took this consumer-driven demand approach, and we started looking at within this space what's missing in order to communicate to businesses that consumers really do care about how they behave in society. And there's a lot missing. That's not a very well captured metric. It's not a very well connected to the bottom line, the bottom dollar for business. And so we started thinking about what might it look like if we could directly tie how consumers believe and behave within who they are as people to how they spend, and then with how they spend, communicate to businesses that their role in society really is to help cure the environment, to make sure that people are well taken care of, to help solve for even complex things like poverty and education and healthcare. So we designed Trestle from the perspective that consumers, if they had all the information in the world and it was extremely easy, would spend their money in a way that connects with who they are as humans and how they believe society should look. So what we're building is the tools and the technologies that help consumers to do that, to have the information that they need in an extremely convenient way at the point that they need it in order to spend dollars in line with their values, so that we can communicate to businesses that this is important to us. Yep.
So you've got this great system. Current instantiation is a browser extension that helps people shop to those values. 8 weeks ago, the world changes, and what does that inspire your company to do?
Man, well, having a public health background and feeling a little awkward that I'm not participating meaningfully really left a hole in my heart, because this is what I'm trained to do, and I didn't have an active role. So it was really important to me to figure out, if I do have this thing, Trestle, what can we use it for in order to help alleviate some of the pain or help people in our communities? So because we have this tool out in the market, it's a browser extension, like you said, that pops up information, helps redirect people based on what they say they care about. And so we just really quickly saw this opportunity to add a new value. And it's something we always knew people were going to care about. We just haven't implemented it yet. You know, as a startup, you start small and build as you grow. So it was always on the roadmap to add small businesses as a value that people could choose to support. But now was the time to actually implement that. So fortunately for us, we had already collected a lot of the information and data. All we had to do was, you know, tweak a little thing and turn it on. And with that, we now can help. The tool can now actually, when you're shopping on Amazon, on Nordstrom, on Target, on these large marketplaces where we would naturally go to shop online, who are doing just fine, by the way.
Yeah. Jeff Bezos is only like $2 trillion richer now because of this whole situation.
I know. But while we're on those marketplaces, this will allow small businesses that have similar products at similar prices to what's being sold on marketplaces to pop up in front of users, just as a quick reminder, hey, remember, here's this small business. And they're not always easy to find, especially as a lot of them are just entering the ecosystem of e-commerce for the first time. They really need help with discovery. And so this is just one of the ways that small businesses can be seen by a wider audience.
That's awesome. Yeah, so not to oversimplify it, but it's very similar to a Honey or another kind of browser extension where through the use of the browser as you would normally shop, it's just part of the natural workflow of stuff, which is what I actually love about it, that it's like sometimes you forget it's there and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, yeah, now I could buy this here. So being a user, it's super convenient, and I encourage folks to try it out. Changing gears a little bit, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about that so impressed me about you and your co-founder Carl are really taking advantages of, again, as a systems thinker, the systems that are already in place to support entrepreneurs, right? So you did the Pi Excel boot camp, you're part of Startups, you came through Pi and continue to mentor for Pi. How does a founder find those things? How did you figure out that those resources were available to you for folks who might be looking for that same kind of help?
You know, I can speak from the perspective of an extrovert, which I think has its advantages here. You might be able to speak more to the introverted strategy of that. But okay, just really quick on the background, I didn't even know entrepreneurship was a thing until just a couple of years ago. So when I decided to go do this, I had to dig myself out of a hole of knowing nothing about it. So I don't remember how we first did it, but I somehow learned of a resource, like a startup resource event, like a couple years ago. And that's how I learned about Pi. And once I got into Pi Excel Bootcamp, where we met our co-founder Damola, who I see is in the chats, which is awesome. And eventually convinced him to come join us. Thanks. Once I got into one of them, the others started to unveil themselves. And I think at the time that I got into that we were in Pi Excel Bootcamp, I think you had been very intentional about creating pathways between the two programs from Pi and Pi. And so we learned about Pi through that. And then just the more we're involved in the community, the more a lot of these become known. And so I think for the reason I say extrovert is because it's much more comfortable for me to just show up and start asking questions, and I enjoy it. Outside of that, I guess somebody else would have to follow Silicon Flores to really know.
Maybe, I don't know. Caligator's always good. So in addition to like you, I think without, again, oversimplifying it, your team really exemplifies that kind of startup hustle in a way that isn't rare, but is more rare around these parts than I would like it to be. And one of the ways that you exhibit that hustle is you were doing a bunch of side hustles as a founder to like keep the lights on while you were building this thing. Maybe talk folks through like what you did there and where you saw opportunities and how you took advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, and I think too, in this, I also have to acknowledge some of the privilege that I have and that Carl has. He has a side gig of modeling, and he just has a natural ability to do that. He's an attractive guy, and they like to put him on magazines.
And he has a poop emoji plunger.
Yes,
as
and
well.
he has a previous business that still brings in revenue for us. So there are a couple of pieces that are kind of mostly through Carl, really. I got to be honest with him. That does bring in some regular small amounts of revenue that just kind of help move things along. But outside of that, it definitely doesn't cover everything that we need. Outside of that, we have both done the 4 a.m. Uber, Lyft driving for hours before starting the day, doing it on the weekends at night, where most startup founders, I think, would be, if they don't already have a lot of resources, I think there's this belief that you have to get either live in a basement somewhere or in a very small studio or like reduce your rent. We took the opposite approach. We got a house with lots of rooms and bathrooms and started doing Airbnb to earn extra money. And it really, in some months it covers all of the rent so that we can actually keep, surviving. And so it's, excuse me, I think that's what you're referring to is we've gotten really creative. Basically, I like to ask the question, how does the white rich man get rich? Like, what are the loopholes that he has identified? I'm going to go find those same ones and do that. It's not taught. It's not part of any kind of education system, but some people have figured this out really well. So what is it that they're doing, and can I replicate that?
Nice. I think that's really good advice. How has that, we talked a little bit about it in the green room, and I hope this is okay, but like, how has this pandemic situation kind of affected that kind of gig financing you've been using?
Yeah. Well, the gigs they've changed. I mean, if we could still do some of those things, it probably looks more like food delivery right now, rather than rideshare. So those things still exist and people are doing them. We, in October this year, actually pulled out my retirement from having worked. So that gave us a couple of months not doing gig economy work outside of Airbnb. And so we're really liking that life of not doing it. So looking for ways to not. But because COVID hit, it's all... I want to be sensitive because we've been living this life where we're not really sure how next month's going to be paid or what we have to do to make it happen. And now everybody's feeling that same thing. And because of that, the systems are changing. There's rent reductions, credit card payments don't have to be made, loan payments are postponed. And so because of this, a lot of our expenses it's been more about, expense reduction, cost reduction, rather than increasing income, which has a net similar effect. Our bills are paid still, and we're eating, and it's working for us so far right now.
Good. I'm glad. All right. I could sit here and ask questions all day, but there's an audience here who has questions as well. So I think we're going to go ahead and get into that. If you have questions and haven't had a chance to ask them yet, please feel free to look right down at the bottom of your screen to the Ask a Question button. There's a highlighted number 5 near it right now, and that's the question queue where you can kind of submit your question for Jennifer to answer. Even if you don't have a question, jump in there and look to see what other people are asking, because you can go ahead and upvote those questions that you would like to see her focus on. So getting into it, the first question is, we got into a little bit of the origin story, but maybe going into a little more depth about how you came up with the idea. Like, how did you hit upon like that particular consumer facing facet of what you were trying to accomplish?
So when we were first talking about this, we envisioned something different. We were like, oh, let's create a marketplace where we can bring together companies that do good things, and we can say that this is a better place to shop. And we got really wise advice from a local tech leader that basically said, don't create a marketplace. If there's another way to solve this problem, do the other thing instead.
Yep.
Which, to be fair, at the moment crushed my dreams. I thought I had the right idea. I thought we'd figured it out. But what that gave us permission to do was, okay, if it's not a marketplace, how does this problem still get solved? And it opened up our mind. When we closed one door, it opened up our mind to explore what other types of technologies or systems need to exist if it's not going to look like this one other thing that it would be really challenging. And so we, I don't even know at what point it became a browser extension. I think pretty early on, we realized that technology was probably what we were looking for because it could work across marketplaces, it could work across websites. And I think that's what we realized needed to happen and to exist. So a big part of our focus, because let me just say that I'm from the Midwest, Indiana, and being from Indiana, the value system moving from the middle of the country to Portland, Oregon was vastly different. The language that's used, the behaviors, it's all very different. So I had to navigate this completely new culture. And so bringing my background with me, I realized in order for this to be useful for people outside of Portland, Oregon, we need to have an incredible focus on convenience and not asking the consumer to do anything really. We wanted to figure out what's the technology that makes it so that people almost accidentally buy according to their values. So that's really what we put a lot of focus on when we were thinking through what a solution could look like. And this type of technology really does get at that. I mean, it's outside of the fact that you have to install it once and answer 2 questions. Outside of that, it interrupts you when there's something worth interrupting you for it. Otherwise, you just don't even know it exists.
Yep. Yeah. And I think you hit upon something that I don't want to lose there, which is I think when you're in, be it the startup bubble or the Portland cultural bubble, like some of the things you're saying, people might go, well, yeah, it's obvious you shop local or you shop with your values or whatever, but that's not the case everywhere. And sometimes opportunities that might not seem as relevant in Portland are massive opportunities elsewhere. And I think that's really important that you had that insight to pursue something that most Portland people might think of as an obvious thing.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I've been in Portland for 8 years now, and I still am not great at it. I still don't know which of the 8 bins to put my to-go coffee cup, or if you even can recycle. I still don't really know. So the ignorance serves me well, I think, and how I think about building this for people who don't have it ingrained in them to be intentional or to know how to do it. And I think you're right. I think having lived in other places with other value systems and other behavioral sets helps me see that this place, Portland's very special. The people here are very special, and they all, not all, but a large portion of us really have a focused, concentrated effort on supporting each other and supporting local and small business. And I don't know that that's as valued in other areas.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time, I grew up in rural communities, and it's the same, like it's almost the exact opposite, right? Like it's illogical to shop local because the big box is cheaper and that's where I'm going to go, or the chain is cheaper and that's where I'm going to go. And so I've always appreciated that about your product, that if there are folks in those communities whose cultures maybe don't align as much with the broader community's culture, but it also kind of gives them a community to engage with, that where their values are resonating with the broader community. So I really like that.
Yeah.
As you dig into information, what is surprising you the most about what companies are really like? For-profit companies.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most surprising thing has been not anything about their operations, but how not good at talking about this side. Look, this sentence is already not making sense. Companies are not very good at talking about their operations. We have a history of not doing that. The way companies make our products has never been a question before. Consumers haven't really cared or asked the question. So companies are just now having to figure out how the hell to get this information out there when they know that they have less than 3 seconds of a consumer's attention. And now somehow this is important and it fits in somewhere, but not really sure if it's part of the buying process or the backstory or the product story. Where does it live? What language do we use? So I think the thing that surprised me the most is that companies aren't good at it.
Yeah.
They're not. And, I think a lot of times they don't even think about it until there's pressure applied.
Yep. Well, and it also feels kind of like to your point, the consumers are starting to kind of drive this conversation, right? So it's very much like back when companies had to develop a web strategy and they were really bad at it, or a mobile strategy and they're really bad at it. I kind of see them struggling to talk through what are the values of the corporation and how do we create and or sell the product we produce.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
And I'll just plug, because anybody in here has a company and they're thinking through how to communicate this side.
I've got the link for that.
I'm happy to help anybody think through how to communicate this side of your business. I also have an article that I wrote on 10 best practices for transparency. That's on LinkedIn. I'm trying to put out resources because I know that this is really tricky. You have to be honest, and there's the possibility for greenwashing. So there's a lot of potential pitfalls, but if you want some support around thinking through this side of your business, happy to sit down with anybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like we have another Pi Crowdcast to do about greenwashing and communicating values 101.
Yeah. We should do that, actually.
Yeah, it would be a good one, I think. Why the name Trestle?
Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get this cough still. Okay, so Trestle, the first name was Golden Fish. It was the holding name only because Carl, my co-founder, and I were eating goldfish at the time that we started thinking about this. So that was our first, and we're like, oh, and it's like the golden rule. And anyways, so Trestle though, which took some time and some effort and some thought to put together. But what we wanted was something. Let me just start with this. Everybody else that's playing in this space was putting the word good in their name, or ethical, or they were putting a value within the naming system, or charity. Like they had this notion of goodness and altruism within the name. And when we were doing our initial research, we either got the impression or we were reading about that notion really actually turns people off, unfortunately. It becomes a lot less sexy when there's this notion of good within it. So we really tried to stay away from anything that looked like that. And when we thought about what is it that we really are at the core base of it, yes, we have this tool, the browser extension, but what we actually are is setting up the data in a structural way so that it can be delivered to a consumer in a useful way, whether that's through a consumer facing tool like the browser extension or through other means. And so with this notion of structure in mind and thinking about, we kind of had this idea of bridging consumers with brands based on values. And we were actually driving over the bridge from Washington into Oregon, coming back to Portland from Seattle. And, Carl we were like, what are some bridge names? Maybe we can give a nod back to the city that we built this in. Yeah, maybe we can do a bridge name. We're like, what are some bridge names? And Carl just said Trestle. And I'd actually never heard of the word before. And I'm like, wait,
Mhm.
what was that? What was that word you just said? Say that again? Kind of sounds nice, doesn't it? And the more we looked into it, the more we saw that it's one of the strongest architectural structures. And it really fit nicely with this notion of bridging that we identified with, but also the structural role we see ourselves playing in society, where other things can be built on top of the work that we're doing. And so it works perfectly for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think I really like the concept that you've started to hone in on, which is um, it may be a browser extension right now, but it's really that data set that you're accumulating and that knowledge that you're accumulating to leverage in a multitude of other ways.
And really, my vision is that if someday like the browser extension won't even be necessary, because this data will be so integrated into all aspects of how we buy from a company that we don't need extra tools.
Yep.
Just like price is a part of the process of buying from something, this will be part of the process of buying from something. So moving towards future integrations in other ways that make this data just incredibly accessible.
Yep, I love that. Speaking of the data, can you elaborate a bit on the metrics of how Trestle analyzes a brand, company, values, that sort of thing?
Yep. And this is actually something that's fairly unique to us in this space. But we take an agnostic, sorry, can you hear that? We take an agnostic approach to collecting data. So we're not actually rating companies, we're collecting information on their operations. And we're fortunate that there are auditing boards and certification boards out there that do the judgment work for us, so that all we have to do is collect the data and make it usable for a consumer. So what we're looking at is not whether a company is good enough or bad. What we're looking for is evidence that supports and demonstrates what they say they do. And so where we place a standard is on the type of proof that a company has when they make a claim about a value, rather than is what they're doing good enough or bad enough. And then what we do, instead of rating the company, what we do is compatibility with the consumer. So one of the first things you do when you onboard with the myTrestle button, which is the browser extension, is you say what your most important values are. We want it to be personalized to each person. We know that people, and our data shows this, not everyone believes the same thing. I come from Indiana, now living in Portland. The values, we all have different values. And what we wanted to create was a tool that celebrates that and allows people to really connect their values with their own shopping behaviors. And so what the compatibility does is it allows us as users to, I love this from the Pi demo day, in less than 3 seconds, the degree to which this company actually represents the values that we care about most.
Yeah, regardless of what those values are. And I think the fact that you've developed that platform where values can be extended in a variety of ways, it doesn't necessarily need to be sustainability or local. I mean, that's just a really interesting framework to start thinking through the way different people choose to kind of vote with their dollars.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for founders behind socially conscious companies who could benefit from Trestle?
Okay, a couple of things. First, I love that you're going after a socially driven company. All I want is to make a system that means that your business does better. I want to see more socially conscious businesses thriving because of the systems we're building. So I already applaud you. And then secondly, we're hoping to build the tools that help consumers find you. So get on the myTrestle button. It's free. We're allowing companies to add 3 products, and it basically allows you to pop up your products in front of a user when they are shopping on large marketplaces. So get on our tools. But also, I'm really concerned about socially driven businesses until we've mastered the system on a grand scale, because there's a lot of cost with being socially driven. And if It's very, very easy to be undercut by brands and companies that are much larger, that aren't socially driven. And so hang on, keep hanging on. The system's not ready for socially driven businesses yet to really, really thrive, but it's getting better. And the more companies like ours exist and other marketplaces exist, the more we'll create access points between consumers and brands that are doing this. And the more we can allow customers to communicate that they want you to exist in society. It's not immediately actionable, I'm sorry to say, except for getting on Trestle, of course. But it's more of things are happening, things are changing slowly, and us existing in this space is becoming more relevant.
Thank you. Yeah, we haven't touched on this one yet. What's Trestle's business model? How do you make money?
This is one of my favorite things. We spent about a year debating this because there is a business model that is like a low-hanging fruit, early revenue, can implement immediately. The structures and systems are already in place with affiliate. And it was still to this day, people love to tell me that I should consider affiliate. And it really just goes against my gut feeling that will hurt our credibility. And so what we've decided to focus our business model on is the core competency that we have is data aggregation, and then analysis of behaviors, consumer behaviors, when they have access to this information. So we have two business models that we're in early validation of. One is through API integration into other technologies. So like I said, I have this vision where this data is easily accessible everywhere that somebody would shop. And if we can integrate the data around business operations into marketplaces, payment processing systems, other consumer-facing tools that we're already using, that's where revenue will exist. And that's a pretty common model within technology, with integrations. Really sorry. And then the other one is a B2B SaaS, where we actually provide a dashboard for brands so that they can see real-time data on how consumers are buying between them and competitors, and actual insights and consumer analysis on specifically these values of brands. So we're still developing that dashboard, but we did just do a beta test over the holiday season with 7 brands that came along with us. And we were able to kind of capture that type of data for the first time. So we've gotten some of the very first behavioral data according to values. And now we're turning that into some dashboards that can be more of a B2B SaaS play.
Awesome. Thank you. Not really a question, but more discussion generator. Oh, okay. So maybe future feature roadmap kind of thing. I'll paraphrase this, apart from the company just reporting how good they are you thinking of features where the consumer can either validate or report how good the company is?
I love that question because, but we haven't done any testing to see if people want that or would do it. We're taking from the fact that Wikipedia is very successful, and other crowdsourced informations are very successful. So I think right now we have 2 primary data sources, which is the brand themselves and then third-party systems outside of the brand, like certification auditing boards. But we do have a vision for incorporating a way that consumers can play a more meaningful role, and at least indicating whether they trust a claim, or being able to actually speak to it if they have information. So much, down the road, but it's definitely part of the roadmap. But whoever asked that question, I'd love to talk to you more about your thoughts after the call.
Cool. How and where do you get the data from companies, and how do you prevent companies from greenwashing that data, or how do you validate that data?
Right. So we spent the first year and a half, Carl and I, doing the grunt work that nobody really wants to ever do, which is hand analyzing companies. So going out and figuring out where does this information exist, what language is it in, can we quantify it across industry, product category, company type, and we've been able to develop a system. Now, to the greenwashing piece, that's really, really tricky because it's very easy for a company to say whatever they want. The qualification that we use to think about this is if a company states it clearly enough and specifically enough that if in a court of law it can be proven otherwise, proven to be wrong, then it's an acceptable claim to us. That doesn't mean it's perfectly true, and that doesn't mean that it's not a cherry-picked piece of information and data, and we're very aware of that. And until there's more market force demanding clarity and transparency around product creation, we'll have to kind of just do our best with this as we move forward. But calling for transparency, using certifications and auditing boards, the organizations that are going in and actually doing the digging and the work, holding their word a little bit higher. And then also where a brand states it themselves, we believe this can be valuable and companies can talk about the good that they do, but where they state it specifically enough that we would accept it. For example, the word support is one of the words that we tend to steer clear from, and it usually is not specific enough to indicate anything real. So if you have a company, use the word support carefully. You know, if you say we support a local charity, tell us how. Tell us either dollar numbers or volunteer hours or whatever it is that you're doing. Give specific information so that it builds credibility and trust and transparency to how you're communicating with consumers.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Another feature request. Have you started thinking about how augmented reality could be a mobile option for this data? So point my phone, excuse me, at a shelf and it highlights the one I should buy among all of these products I'm looking at.
Man, wouldn't that be cool?
It'd be pretty fun.
If you're in a store and you saw, well, we don't go to stores anymore, but if you're in a store and you're looking at the 27.
You point at your browser and see on your browser.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at all the different types of peanut butter and you're like, gosh, I don't know. Like, what am I supposed to look at? Sugar or what am I supposed to look at here? You could just like shine a light on it and it just highlights the one, making your choice so easy. Yeah, that'd be really great. I don't personally have plans at this point in time to do that, mostly because we're focusing on if there is an augmented reality company that's building this in, we can provide the data so that you can help, so you can implement that. But we haven't started to envision the technologies that we would create outside of integration with other technologies. Did that make sense?
That does make sense.
Yeah.
You're the Stripe. You're not the application doing the selling. You're the data on the back end.
Yeah.
Okay, so we made it through all the audience questions, which means it's time to kind of turn the tables a bit. And we as a community have shown up here to hear from you and Trestle, and we're wanting to help. What can we do to be most helpful to Trestle right now?
Yeah. So with this new feature for small businesses, small business override, one of the benefits is that a lot of small businesses haven't really been very good about talking about their values. So on our system, they wouldn't naturally necessarily, shine and rise to the top. But what this allows them to do is bypass that process and be seen by consumers who really do want to support small businesses. So if you know small businesses that sell products online, especially if they're trying to be seen by customers or they want to broaden their consumer base, get them signed up. It's about maybe an hour. Otherwise, it's free. It's a really easy tool. And look, it may not produce any sales, but it's another way that brands can increase visibility. So helping to get the word out about this tool for small businesses, definitely use the myTrestle button and honestly give feedback. We really want to make sure that this is useful to you. And if anybody has connections at REI or Any other large marketplaces? Target. We're starting to think through what this might look like with an integration play and starting to have some of those early conversations. So maybe if you could open up your connections, if you have any, but other than that, a simple, easy way is really to make sure that small businesses know about this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jennifer, really appreciate you taking the time and the transparency answering these questions for us. It's always great to get the chance to catch up, and I'm sorry it's been so long with all the craziness. Thank you to everyone who showed up. Thank you for the great questions.